Hopefully 2023 will be a much better year than the past when so many of us were alienated, ridiculed, and often labeled as conspiracy theorists. Even though everything we were saying was based in fact, 99% of the time, the conspiracy theorist label was given simply for saying something that went against the establishment liberal orthodoxy, not because it was quackery rooted in falsehoods. Now that we're officially in the new year, let's take a look back at 10 of the quote-unquote conspiracies that ended up not being conspiracies at all, and the many narratives pushed by those in power that were actually lies. Maybe we can make a New Year's resolution to make 2023 the year of truth. All right, so let's get started with number 10. And by the way, there were so many of these to choose from because they've been gaslighting us that I had to whittle the list down to only 10. But there are many, many more than this. But here's 10 of them. All right, number 10. The mainstream media tried to gaslight us into believing the trucker freedom convoy was just a bunch of racist, sexist, right-wing terrorists, that the protest was filled with a bunch of Trump-loving white supremacists. And in reality, the protest, which was about stopping vaccine mandates, was in Canada, where people can't even vote for Trump, was primarily organized by a woman who they threw in jail, was filled with people from all sides of the political spectrum who came together for the one purpose of supporting medical freedom of choice, and many of whom were not white at all. Number 10. After years of the mainstream media pointing the finger at Ukraine for having a legitimate Nazi problem, to the point where in 2015 Congress actually passed a measure to block Ukrainian Nazi battalions, namely the Azov battalion, from getting U.S. money and weapons, suddenly this past year the Nazis were no longer Nazis, but instead just patriotic Ukrainians deserving of billions in U.S. money and weapons. In fact, the Azov battalion were celebrated as heroes and treated like celebrities after their standoff with Russia in the Mariupol steel plant. Number 8. When people claimed social media was shadow banning them for opinions contrary to the establishment liberal narrative, when people claimed the government was meddling with free speech, when people claimed they were being surveilled by the FBI via social media, they were called conspiracy theorists. Yet the Twitter files showed us they weren't conspiracies at all. Here's Elon Musk.
I mean, to be totally frank, almost every conspiracy theory that people had about Twitter turned out to be true. Is there a conspiracy theory about Twitter that didn't turn out to be true? So far, they've all turned out to be true, and if not, more true than people thought.
Number 7. For years, we've been hearing Trump colluded with Russia to win the 2016 presidential election, and that if we only saw his tax returns, we'd finally see proof the man is a Putin puppet. Well, now, just this past week, his tax returns were finally released, and they ended up being the most anticlimactic event of all of 2022. Number 6, the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, remember when they silenced any mention of the laptop, claiming it was not real and the entire thing was Russian disinformation? They claimed Russians hacked into the computer, planted incriminating evidence, then dropped it off at the computer repair shop and somehow manipulated the American store owner to snoop through it and hand it over to former mayor of America's largest city, Rudy Giuliani, who also was clearly a Putin puppet. They said the whole thing was a ploy by Russia and not even worth reporting on. They aggressively refused to report on it. The New York Post was suppressed and the story was removed from Twitter and other social media just before the election. Yet in the end, we know the Hunter Biden laptop is real, and authenticated contents reveal not only Hunter Biden's drug use and sex with prostitutes, sure, but also economic entanglements via Burisma, the energy company in Ukraine, and possible corruption by Joe Biden, the big guy, who may or may not have allowed his son to peddle his influence to foreign countries like China, which they're still trying to claim as a conspiracy theory without any evidence of it being a conspiracy theory because they refuse to have an investigation. Number 5. Remember when many of us said the lockdowns and mandates would change the fabric of American freedom by ushering in an unprecedented nanny state? We were called conspiracy theorists, that mandates wouldn't be a thing and that the pandemic wouldn't be used to create a dystopian surveillance state. couple of years later, and now even the mainstream media is concerned. Look at this post from AP. Quote, an AP investigation has found that COVID-19 accelerated and normalized state surveillance and tracking tools that are now being used to investigate crime and harass marginalized communities. Are we capable of having a reckoning around the use of this data, or is this the new normal? Number 4. Remember when Dr. Gert Vanden Bossche warned the COVID vaccines could cause mutations in the virus? This was right at the beginning of the pandemic before vaccines had come out. He asserted that vaccines are like antibiotics and that when they're both overused and imperfect, they allow germs to mutate in dangerous ways. Now, that idea was heavily censored. It was removed from social media and shunned, and he was called a quack. Now look at this. Published on New Year's Day of this year, an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal asking this very question about vaccines mutating the virus. You couldn't ask this question 2 years ago, but now after many people have been jabbed multiple times and we've seen mutation after mutation after mutation that evades the vaccine, they're finally asking the question they should have been asking before they rolled their vaccine out in the first place. Number 3, the lab leak theory. Now, any discussion about COVID coming from anything other than a Chinese woman eating a bat was considered a conspiracy theory, especially if the discussion involved the virus possibly coming from a lab. The lab leak theory was heavily censored. I myself had a video removed and my YouTube channel given a strike in April of 2020 for reporting on what foreign heads of state were saying about the virus coming from a lab. I was later hit again a couple of months later for reporting on EcoHealth Alliance and Fauci funding gain-of-function research. Now there's a legitimate discussion about a possible lab leak causing the pandemic. Not that we're likely to find out the truth anytime soon, but nonetheless, the so-called conspiracy theorists were vindicated once again. Number 2, the vaccines. If you believed anything other than the vaccines will stop the spread, you won't get sick or die if you're vaccinated, and they're completely safe with only minor side effects like a sore arm and a slight fever, you were ridiculed and shunned and a pariah in society. You were viewed as someone to be banished, punished, and silenced. Friendships were strained, jobs were lost, educations were limited, and the poor became poorer, all because there were some who falsely believed that the shots created by Big Pharma were perfectly safe with no serious side effects, and they believed the shots completely prevented transmission and illness. They were wrong. They were not only wrong in their assumptions about the vaccines themselves, but wrong to silence any debate or questioning around them. They forced them on young men, many of whom ended up with myocarditis. They admitted they can cause serious blood clots. They admitted they don't stop transmission, and they wear off in a matter of months against severe illness and death. Those of us labeled as conspiracy theorists were right. The vaccines don't stop the spread. You can still get sick or worse, and yes, they have side effects. The real conspiracy theorists were the ones making false pie-in-the-sky claims of a magic serum that will keep you safe from the virus and end the pandemic once and for all. Number 1, the big kahuna of all conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theory that started it all. JFK. Anyone for the past 60 years who claimed JFK's assassination was anything other than a lone crazy gunman was labeled and ridiculed as a conspiracy theorist. There's actually a rumor the term itself was invented by the CIA to discredit the considerable number of people who doubted the official version of Kennedy's murder. The term likely existed before JFK's assassination, but it later became a slur to automatically discredit ideas and people. And now here we are 60 years later, and a trove of released documents indicate a much more complicated reality that includes the probable involvement of the CIA. Turns out, the people ridiculed and mocked for the past 60 years didn't deserve it after all, like the many others recently labeled as conspiracy theorists. It's all bunk. In fact, we should now just kind of look at it as a badge of honor in a lot of cases. If they're calling you a conspiracy, I saw this on Twitter. If they're calling you a conspiracy theorist, they're really saying spoiler alert. That's really a more accurate term for it, because the reality is so many that they claim to be conspiracy theories are actually true. And anytime someone's labeled as a conspiracy theorist, it might just mean it's time to actually investigate and look a little deeper into whatever it is they're claiming. Because so often nowadays, conspiracy theorists are not conspiracy theorists at all. They're truth tellers, fact tellers, researchers, and they're connecting the dots and getting a lot of things right. All right, coming up. Max Blumenthal joins us to discuss the blind obedience Democrats seem to have adopted to continually give more money to endless war. And we'll be talking about Democrats' shielding of Ray Epps. So if you're watching someplace other than Rumble, you will want to head over there now because this stream is going Rumble exclusive for the rest of the show. The link is down below. Things are just going to get too spicy for censors. See you there.